communities live mainly in the major cities, Casablanca, Rabat, Fez, and Marrakesh. So as the Jewish community ceases to exist, in 40 years or 50 years from now, there will be no Jews in Morocco. How does the government and how does the Moroccan society deal with this question of the absence of Jews? So in this physical absence of Jews from the majority of Moroccan cities and hinterland, Moroccan Muslims are left with the memories of Jewish life that once existed. The great-grandparents and parents' generations continue to discuss nostalgically do you have the PowerPoint? Do you have the PowerPoint? So they continue to discuss nostalgically the richness of Jewish life in the past. The younger generations occasionally demonstrate narrow and misinformed perspective of Jews. Circulated representations of Jews are usually organized and transmitted through the daily acts of narration around television, in cafes, and in public spaces. In this context of Jewish remembrance, cemeteries and shrines have emerged as an enduring physical emblem and a visible symbol of a national celebration of Jewish heritage. This national performance of Moroccan Jewish historical so-called exceptionality that continues through the preservation of the cemetery and other Jewish material forms drives its national cultural agenda. Today, unlike traditional anthropological focus on cemetery, ritual, in this talk I would like to argue that for Moroccan Jewish diaspora, while cemeteries bridge between home of origin and the home of settlement, they invoke the genesis of a new situational identity, grounded in a Moroccan political, urban, and festival dialogue. I contend that the conservation of Jewish cemeteries and synagogues revolves around state-appropriated discourse of interfaith dialogue modeled after the historical and moral past of Andalusian convivencia. In Moroccan Jewish tradition, cemeteries have a life, and the shrines of holy righteous sages inside the walls of Jewish graveyards are one of the reasons of the celebration of life. Therefore, it is not important but also sacred to take care of tombstones and their inscriptions and to make sure that graves are never disturbed so that the memory of the dead does not disappear. For centuries, Moroccan Jews have taken care of their graves and celebrated their shrines as a community until the last decades of the 20th century. One might assume that Moroccan Jewish departure would end Moroccan Jewish relations with their saints and cemeteries. Moroccan Jews in Israel adjusted, especially during the first years of their migration, to their new social conditions by organizing family hilulot and in private homes, namely synagogues in honor of patron saints in Morocco. Yet even Jewish exodus could not limit the tradition of shrine celebration and the survival of cemeteries throughout Morocco. Today, the first encounter of tourists and visitors with Jewish cemeteries and synagogues in rural and urban Moroccan communities begins with a male or female Muslim guard who usually opens the site. You can see one of the examples here in one of the villages in the south. The ritual of waiting for the Muslim key holder to the Jewish site can take a few minutes, a couple of hours, or more depending on the availability of the caretaker before access to the religious site takes place. Since 2002, I have traveled throughout southern rural Morocco as part of a historical ethnography on Moroccan Jewries, listening to Muslim narratives and stories about their former Jewish neighbors. One of the constant scenes that attracted my attention over 15 years of historical and anthropological research is the number of Muslim men and women, old and young, rural and urban, who served as caretakers of Jewish property, gatekeepers of synagogues, and guardians of Jewish cemeteries. You see, this is another example in Debdu. Debdu was one of the really traditional, one of the oldest Jewish communities in what we call the northern eastern part of the country. The Jewish community actually came after the 1492. And then you have these cemeteries. This is the cemetery of Essaouira, where you have a Muslim woman. She's still the guards with her son. And then this is in Tetouan. But the number is in every cemetery, you see examples of these, basically. In fact, in Morocco today, we can argue that Jewish cemeteries are a space where discourses of and about Jewish-Muslim relations are highly visible in terms of the significance of their restoration by the Moroccan state, private care by local citizens, seasonal absence and presence of Jews, and the meanings of graffiti outside their walls and doors. Despite the fact that the historically Jewish cemeteries and shrines were rarely violated, instances of desecration of Jewish shrines and vandalism exist. As Palestinians and Israelis battle over the Holy Land, Moroccan children and youth occasionally target Jewish sites and property to express their criticism of the Jewish state, its leaders, sometimes Morocco's Jews as its accomplices. In the absence of Moroccan Jews today from the public sphere, cemeteries can provide a number of anthropological vignettes and narratives that allow us to make sense of the meanings and the politics of celebration and memorialization of Jewish life in Morocco. It might be important to mention and note that the time gap between the mass departure in the 1950s and the renewed interest in Jewish cemeteries. There were many cemeteries in smaller communities that for decades had no guardians. That you can see here, this is part of a big government project where and I'm going to talk about that later, where you have put in walls around every cemetery basically. This is throughout the country. Their tombstones disappeared or even sold to tourists. Others disappeared because the land was put to use. So many of the cemeteries were only protected and or surrounded by a wall by Moroccan Jewish immigrants from the community, but often the gravestones were gone or taken in the intervening years, and those cases are very few. In the following presentation, I want to highlight how Moroccan Muslim officials and private maintenance of Jewish cemeteries and conservation of synagogues play a central role in the revival of Muslim memories of Jews. It draws on the ethnography of Jewish cemeteries and shrines throughout Morocco to argue that these once thriving places are used today by the state as a way to maintain its Jewish diaspora's historical relations with their ancestral land. In other words, I claim that through these cemeteries, the state attempts to reconnect Moroccan Jews with their past even as it struggles to include it in its textbooks and educational system. This struggle becomes clear even in the context of the cemetery, where Muslim guards preserve the tombs and shrines inside the cemetery, while uninformed teenagers fill out the facade of the cemetery with anti-Israeli graffiti. I explain the context for this cultural current by rediscovering and conserving Jewish heritage and highlight the internal political dynamics and challenges it faces today. I discuss the movement of cultural renovation and marketing of Jewish heritage in Morocco and its ties to the development of a Jewish cultural tourism that targets in part Israeli tourists of North African descent and sometimes, or as the tradition is going right now, American Jews. And you can see an example here of a community from some Jewish members of the Jewish community from New York. There are many tours of American Jews, especially synagogues, groups. Moroccan so-called exceptionality here is at play as Morocco is recently constructed and imagined among a growing number of American Jews as being one of the friendly Arab countries. One of the friendly Arab countries of the Jews, especially as the story of Muhammad V as righteous among the nations is becoming a topic of conversation within Holocaust centers and institutions. In the midst of the Arab and Islamic and international calls for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, a few countries in the Arab world, namely Lebanon, Morocco, and Tunisia, have engaged in a number of projects to restore local Jewish synagogues and cemeteries. For example, in Lebanon, the Magan Avraham Synagogue, which recently opened its doors for religious services, has been restored largely through donations from Lebanese Jews in the diaspora, especially in New York. However, Morocco remains to a large extent the most celebrated country in which the restoration of Jewish cemeteries is not only part of the political discourse and cultural diplomacy of the government, but also a key aspect of its tourism industry. This is an idea, actually, that the president of Tunisia had in the 1960s and 70s, but the Moroccan government recently put it in place, and I think it excelled at it. The celebration of Jewish shrines and cemeteries and its conservation emerged as a social trend among Jewish diaspora as a way to rediscover Moroccan heritage. It gained full speed after the Oslo Agreement. The rediscovery of Jewish heritage and its underlying economic benefits produced different internal, social, and political relations in Morocco. In 2010, at the initiative of King Mohammed VI, Morocco launched a restoration project of Jewish cemeteries known as House of Life, or Houses of Life. Serge Berdigo, the Secretary General of the Council of the Jewish Community of Morocco, supervised the program's implementation. Over 167 Jewish cemeteries and 12,600 graves were renovated throughout 14 Moroccan regions. It cost the government about $1 million, basically. Many observers speculated that the government's interest in these projects was, quote, motivated by a desire to attract tourists and to curry favor with American Jews. During my personal communications with Moroccan Muslims who served as guards and caretakers of renovated Jewish cemeteries in villages and cities throughout the South, they didn't deny the fact that the conservation of Jewish advances regional and local development as more tourists continued to flock to Jewish shrines. In fact, many argued that the majority of them noted that the fact that Mohammed VI set up sacred spaces as a way to connect the living with the dead is not a problematic consideration at all, given his role as commander of the faithful and guarantor of Jewish life in Morocco. Yet, despite the challenges of the future Jewish physical presence in Morocco, Jewish cemeteries, shrines had to some extent national urban festivals bear positive marker in Morocco, mostly because of their economic value. So here what you see, there is a connection between the renovation of the cemetery and actually the actual celebration of this heritage through festivals. This is what I see the connection here. This is the first connection that they are interested in doing. Many informants claim that Jews possess social quality or sacred quality, which is Baraka or Baruch, blessing. The social and political perception of Jews as, quote, economic saviors is culturally grounded in a traditional Moroccan admiration of Jews and their reputation as successful economic peddlers and merchants. This is historically, if you look at proverbs throughout Morocco in the south, not only in the Jewish dialect, but also in the Muslim dialect, this is a discourse that goes back to 16th, 17th century, or even beyond that. These perceptions align with the traditional belief that Jews and economic powers that could revive a failing economy. The idea of economic fecundity is also a distinctive feature of the traditional views of the Baraka. Baraka is associated with, and I quote, productivity and abundance of the means of living, which are transmitted through saints. Charles de Foucault noted that during his journey through Bijad, this is a city in the south, the special virtues of Sidi bin Dawood were seen to fertilize the earth and make herds prosper. An unpolluted Baraka leads to abundance in crops, to fertility of women, and to the prosperity of the country. However, Westermarck noted, and I quote, Baraka is externally sensitive to external influences and could be easily spoiled by them. These external, Westermarck reported, are largely defined as women, blacks, and Jews. Westermarck listed many cases in which the Baraka of a place or person was being negatively affected by the influence of Jews. He wrote that a Jew must not tread on threshing floor nor enter a granary. If the holy spring or Ixer, which is frequented by saints of Deminat, runs dry, it is a certain sign that some Jews has taken water from it. End of quote. Here Westermarck asserts that Jews are seen as anathema to Baraka and are like women believed to be unclean. In his discussion of the religious festival of Sidi Ahmed Musa, Daniel Schroeter argues that Jews were not allowed to reside in or enter the village of the shrine. They were consigned to an encampment on the outskirts of the village during the time of the festival. Paul Pascon noted that the descendants of the Sharif told him that the Jews were allowed to open shops in the proximity of the festival, but were forbidden from entering the boundaries of the shrine. Paradoxically, as Westermarck's statements also suggest, Jews were also associated with markets, loci of exchange, which for a trade-based economy such as Morocco, traditional Morocco, and now in this context of tourism, were clearly sites of economic productivity. The market is not a clean place, but at the same time, it is a necessary place. Traditionally, then, the Jewish-Muslim encounter in the market is acceptable as long as it does not impinge upon the sanctity of the sacred place, known as the haram. During my ethnographic study in southern Morocco, many informants commented that the best solution to the community's economy would be the return of its Jews. The Jew is now re-emerging in the general consciousness of these communities as somebody who has the magical skills to revive their economy. This is in opposition to traditional attitudes which saw the Jew as endangering the Baraka and the market as a polluting place, which had to be isolated from places today. For example, André Azoulay, the king advisor, a Moroccan Jew, is seen as an embodiment of the Baraka necessary for the economic revival of the city of Essaouira, which all we know of, his native hometown. So you can see is André Azoulay, who basically changed the nature of a city. But that's right on the coastal side. In light of this shift and its opposition to historical formulations, we can argue that informants' new definition of Baraka and their assertions of previous Jewish-Muslim encounters within the boundaries of the sacred are new and invented claims which tie in with the national discourse and serve the political orientation of the Moroccan state. The restoration of cemeteries is largely linked to national Moroccan cultural diplomacy that continues to highlight the celebration and celebrate an Andalusian spirit of convivencia and tolerance. You can see that what we call the Festival of Andalusias of Essaouira here. While Moroccan Muslims guard Jewish cemeteries and shrines, Andalusian music has been the subject of cultural festivals in historical cities such as Essaouira and Fez. The relationship between Jews and Muslims has been highlighted as one of the central dimensions of these meetings. Each year, Jewish and Muslim icons of Andalusian music, such as Rabbi Sami al-Maghribi and Abd Sadaq Shkara, are honored through performances that include living symbols of its tradition, such as Muhammad Brewell of Fez and Rabbi Hayim Luke of Los Angeles. You can see that here. These performances highlight the linguistic and musical traditions of northern Morocco and medieval Spain by mixing Spanish, Moroccan, and classical Arabic and Hebrew while singing historical Andalusian melodies. You can see even have also the theme of women too, which women not only coming from descendants of Moroccan Jews globally. For Moroccan elite, there is a strong connection between Morocco and the medieval Spain. The link is reflected in the symbiotic relationship that characterized the relations between Jews and Muslims in medieval Spain. Through these festivals, stage figures such as André Azoulay enforce a ritualized and institutionalized system of toleration. Anna Bigelow looks at the community of Malerkolta as an Indian sacred site where different religious groups avoid violence and maintain a level of peace between the residents. Bigelow argues that the collective commemoration of the Sufi saint Haidar Sheikh is what defines the community's enduring ethos of tolerance and peace. Azoulay attempts to create a similar model through the commemoration of the ethos of Al-Andalus. In many festivals, he highlights the memory of Al-Andalus as a central to his project and other national festivals. This is what Edward Casey refers to as, and I quote, carrying the past forward through memorialization. In our case, in our Moroccan case, Andalusian music and space are what triggers the possible actualization of tolerance. The collective identity of Essaouira, for instance, a historical extension of Al-Andalus, as many Moroccan Jews would claim, revolves around the harmonious coexistence of Muslims. The idea is to create, through these symbolic interactions in the context of the festival, a future culture of tolerance. Bigelow argues that the common sense approach to living with religious diversity is the norm in Malerkota, in India. But the approach is made normal through practice and repetition. And that's why you have these festivals throughout the years in different regions throughout the country. This, however, is not the case in many Moroccan urban centers where meetings are seasonal. But you see it mostly in the city of Essaouira, for instance. The absence of Jews from the context of Essaouira and other Moroccan cities and villages make the whole project of practicing tolerance also difficult because, as Bigelow observed in her Indian case, social meetings around food and weddings are a key index to the level of understanding. The Andalusian memory of tolerance is also revoked as an integral component of the spirit of Essaouira. Every year during the festival, Jewish or Muslim artists are remembered. André Azoulay described Essaouira as the incarnation of a city that remained true to its past of peace. Unlike other parts of the world, Essaouira maintained a culture of tolerance evocative of the pre-Reconquista Andalusia. The city developers led by Azoulay have publicly announced that the cathartic effect of the urban ritual of tolerance unifies the city not only socially but also economically. The tourism operators and others have turned Moroccan Jewish religious and cultural heritage into a commodity to be sold even as an anti-Israeli sentiment have increased due to the political situation in the Middle East. Therefore, Morocco is faced with a similar situation seen in eastern and western parts of Europe, where tourism operators are marketing Jewish history even as a dormant but growing European anti-Semitism spreads among old and new generations. The cultural revival of in many cities that were emptied of their Jewish citizens during and after the Holocaust is part of a European tourism that targets, among other potential visitors, Jews from all over the world. In the late 1990s, as the Berlin Wall fell and its historical psychological effect began to disappear, East European cities began to revive their cultural histories, especially their Jewish chapters, as a way to come to terms with the destructive forces of the Nazi racial genocide. After the flattening of European Jewish synagogues and homes, as well as the burning of libraries, prayer books, Torah scrolls, and the demolition of tombs, schools, and businesses, Europe had a sudden change of heart, at least in the post-World War era, and began embracing its Jews and Jewish cultural objects. In fact, as Ruth Gruber notes, and I quote, Jewish culture, or what passes for Jewish culture, or is perceived or defined as Jewish culture, has become a visible and sometimes highly visible component of the popular public domain in countries where Jews themselves now are practically invisible, end of quote. The cultural Judaization of urban spaces and the museumification of synagogues and homes denote underlying economic object, especially as Eastern European cities face dramatic economic challenges in the aftermath of the Soviet Union political. Hence, Jews and things Jewish, meanwhile, are popular attractions, even a category of commercial merchandise. All Jewish quarters are under development as tourist attractions where Jewish-style restaurants with Jewish-sounding names write their signs in Hebrew or Hebrew-style letters, use Jewish motifs in the decor, and name their dishes, sometimes even dishes made from pork or not kosher mix of meat and dairy products, after rabbis and Old Testament prophets, as Gruber would write. In her work on Jewish tourism in Poland, Erika Lehrer argues that Jewish Holocaust tourism shaped the politicization of emotion and the cultivation of shared feelings of historical belongings. Lehrer argues that these Jewish travels to Europe are influenced by, and I quote, Jewish missions, which grew with the development of tourist infrastructures and Israeli university foreign student programs through the 1960s and 1970s. And until the late 1980s, a robust industry of mission tourism consisted largely of American youth trips to Israel, end of quote. However, these organized Jewish groups developed in a context of troubling post-war anti-Semitism that Jewish tourism rarely experienced in a direct way. Instead, Jewish tourism in Europe is built upon a dehistoricized anti-Semitism and an image of Europe fossilized in the near aftermath of World War II, as Lehrer would write. This interest in cemeteries and neighborhood limits Jewish tourists' direct contact with local population and cultures in Morocco. Jack Kugelmas notes that the experiences which Jewish tourists in Poland remember are likely to be those that enhance an already existing negative opinion. While Jewish tourists in Europe travel to see the camps, North African Jews travel to Morocco to celebrate their religious shrines and visit family tombs. For many Jews, this is actually an opening in one of the synagogues, one of the oldest synagogues in the 18th. And then you can see here the prime minister was from the PJD, the Islamic Party, and then Serge Berdigo and Toledano of the Jews, including the heads of the rabbinical court, which is still functioning in Morocco. For many Jews, Morocco serves as a nostalgic symbol of a Jewish heritage within Arab lands. By the early 1990s, and despite the Second Gulf War, many Israeli tourists had already begun to enter Morocco. For these tourists, Michael Laskia writes, the opportunity to visit their ancestral land sink into nostalgic childhood memories and frequent the graves of venerated Jewish saints known as Sadiqin or Sadiqim turned out to be a positive emotional experience. In Morocco, it became an enterprise that advances human development in that it also attracted Jewish tourists of Moroccan origin from France and Canada. In Morocco, where tourism represents a central part of the economy, great numbers of Jewish tourists annually visit cultural Jewish quarters that have become a key source of the regeneration of the old Islamic cities such as Fez. After the Madrid Peace Agreement or Conference, and the signing of the Oslo Declaration of Principles on September 13, 1993, Hassan II, the former king of Morocco, relied heavily on the political and economic weight of André Azoulay and Serge Berdigo, and their connections with the Moroccan Jews in Israel, Europe, and in North America. In November 1994, the liaison offices in Jerusalem and Rabat were officially opened, launching a new era of public Moroccan-Israeli relations, mostly tied to the tourism and the agricultural industry. The establishment of postal relations facilitated economic relations, and Hassan II saw in these initiatives a way to revive the ailing Moroccan economy, especially through agricultural and industrial project. In recent years, there has been an increase in the number of music festivals sponsored by Moroccan Ministries of Culture and Tourism. The government has argued that these events attract internal and foreign tourists and provide occasional and to improve and develop local infrastructure. Traditionally, the Moroccan Ministry of Tourism has marketed the country as a tolerant nation. And I would argue from statistics that now you have as many American Jews now visit Morocco as they visit for a cultural, religious reasons, parts in the Holy Land. That just shows you the sheer increase of numbers of these tourists. So these cases demonstrate a dramatic public shift in Moroccan political views regarding Israel during the last decades. The pragmatic yet secret attitude towards Israel during the reign of Hassan II had been replaced by a number of vocal associations and individuals who have been critical of cultural normalization. This is the response, what you see in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere, especially in the private sphere, towards some of these discourses. On February 18, 2014, a group of Moroccans protested the inauguration of an exhibition on Spanish Jews in Morocco at the Spanish Cultural Center, the Cervantes Institute. Organized by the National Committee of the Support of Palestine, the demonstration raised signs with slogans aimed at Andrea Zolai, King Mohammed VI's advisor, and denounced the cultural exhibit as a normalization of relations with Israel. In Morocco, an anti-normalization bill was sponsored by the PJD, the leftist Party for Progress and Socialism, and the Party of Authenticity and Modernity to criminalize economic and cultural and sporting relations with Israel. After local and international pressure, the bill was cancelled despite continuous pressure from anti-normalization Moroccan groups. Despite these political attitudes that reject any form of cultural and political association with Israel and sometimes with Jews, Morocco is one of the few Arab countries where a public debate about Jewishness and Israel is not only allowed, but also includes diverse voices. For instance, a group of young and middle-aged Moroccan Amazigh activists have publicly welcomed Moroccan Israeli Jews to come to the valleys of Sousse, Daraa, and Tafilat, which is part of this renovation models here, or at least restoration models that's going on. In Sousse, a political bastion of the PJD, or the Islamic Party, a group of teachers in the university graduate launched a Berber Jewish Friendship Association. Its founders contend that their main objectives were to promote the cultural diversity of the region, disseminate social tolerance, and create economic bridges with Moroccan Jews living abroad. Against the backdrop of a national and popular movement sympathetic to Palestinian political demands, delegations of Moroccan Amazighi teachers visited Yad Vashem to participate in a week-long educational seminar about the teaching of the Shoah. And you can see them here. This is the debates about the Holocaust in Morocco now is one of the, it's really a very largely deep, many discussions you see today about these issues today. In Morocco, to conclude, in Morocco, there is a growing movement led by a Muslim youth to engage this Jewish past. So let me just, yeah. In December 2014, I met a few members of a youth club in Rabat, known as a Mimouna, who were preparing to launch a cultural caravan, a 300-mile traveling roadshow about Moroccan Judaism. The club Mimouna is named after the traditional Moroccan Jewish post-Passover celebration welcoming the return of the leavened bread. For Moroccan Jews, Mimouna signifies the promise of redemption and the hopeful return of the Messiah. I asked them why they care about a topic that could potentially bring them nothing but stigma and social rejection. Almost all of them highlighted how little Moroccan youth know about their history and how significant it is for them, for their compatriots beyond the walls of university campuses to embrace Morocco's cultural diversity. For many Moroccans, particularly younger ones, the country's Jewish story is part of the past and has no place in post-independent society. How could we have a club about Moroccan Jews, many of whom occupy Palestinian land, some of them say? one Mimouna critic in Casablanca whispered to me during a visit I made in 2010. It was an attitude I knew well from my anthropological and ethnographic research on Moroccan Jewish communities. But the social pressure on me as a professional ethnographer was minimal compared to the pressures the students and members of Mimouna face. A few acknowledged their frustration and anxiety about being ostracized because of their interest in learning about Moroccan Judaism, which to them is really about Moroccan history. Recently, the name of one of the Mimouna Club members was listed in a public document published online by the Moroccan Observatory Against Normalization with Israel, alongside names such as André Azoulay, Driss Liazami, the president of the National Human Rights Council, and Berber or Amazigh activists, some of whom maintain contact with Israeli institutions and other public organizations. With tourism revenues becoming a pivotal part of the Moroccan economy, Jewish cultural heritage is increasingly seen as an integral part of their national histories. This shift began as a private endeavor of a few Moroccan Jews, along with Jews from other countries. When the Moroccan government recognized that it might not be able to capitalize on its Jewish, culture by marketing its dialogue and tolerance to Jews for Moroccan diaspora, it got its ministries of culture and tourism involved. By preserving Jewish graveyards throughout throughout Morocco, the state acknowledges the centrality of pilgrimage events to its tourism and national revenues. The project, these are the last stages of the project. But the crux of the matter remains. The conservation of Jewish cemeteries will never fully succeed unless Moroccan Jewish history and culture are taught in the country's schools and universities outside Mohammed V University, where you have one of the few programs studying Moroccan Judaism. The revival of Jewish heritage and the conservation of buildings is necessary, but without comprehensive internal, civil, and political public debates regarding Moroccan Jewishness, the impact of this revival will be limited. The curation of the Mellah, its synagogues and cemeteries, must move beyond the conservation of walls and tombs of Jewish tourists. As a young university Moroccan student once told me during a visit to the Jewish Museum of Casablanca, instead of simply marketing it to the outside world, the material and immaterial Jewish heritage of Morocco should become part of the national collective memory and celebrated alongside Amazigh, Arab, Islamic, and African heritage already outlined in the 2011 Constitution. Otherwise, as one of my informants argues, Jewish cemeteries, shrines, and neighborhoods will remain nothing but tourist attraction for international Jewish visitors and a veiled reminder to locals of the continuing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you.